What does it mean to have culture? What is gaming culture anyways? And why is gaming culture even a trope?
Gaming itself is a culture, but maybe it's easiest to think about it as a massive, varied and rich collection of subcultures. Each person has their own unique take on it. What's yours?
Welcome to the Gentleland Show, where we talk about game development, design, and culture. It's your access to all things in the games industry. We're your guides.
Hi, I'm Jacky, founder of Gentleland, computer scientist and digital artist.
I'm Edwin, a composer, sound designer, and opera singer.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam, a business and marketing expert and a co-founder at Gentleland. Gaming cultures is really interesting because when we think about culture, we really have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to have culture? I mean, culture in air quotes. So what is culture anyways? Specifically in today's episode, we're going to be talking about gaming culture. Now, is gaming culture a trope? And I don't want to have it be too cliche. I don't want to reduce the topic too much. But one thing that I know for sure is that many people around the world and throughout history have been connected through video games, this art, this science, this love of this medium that we've all been connected together. And because of that, I feel like gaming culture has arisen out of this technological advancement. I always wondered to myself, is gaming culture created by our technological limits or maybe early video games? The first video games that were ever created established the context in which everyone else thought about video games and everyone else built video games from that standpoint moving forward. That's always been something that I've been kind of thinking about. Does that establish video game culture? Curious what you think about that.
Fascinating that you mentioned video gaming culture as a trope, and then you talked about this old-fashioned image of video games and all of that. I think a lot of that persists in modern-day gaming culture, especially things that are marketed to modern-day gaming culture. In terms of, you'd expect chiptune sounds, you'd expect those slightly neon colors, or like the Mario reds, blues, greens. A little hard to describe, but I think everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about. What I find fascinating about that is a culture is a shared set of values, right? And games are quite a young art form. People had to decide, what are the shared set of values? How do we represent games? And they kind of implicitly have to agree on how they're going to share those values. So I think the tropes are actually very important, or were. We could argue they're not so useful anymore, but they were really important for people to just agree on what their shared values are in a very clear way. It's like, oh, I like the color red and green as well. It's a bit more sophisticated than that, but
when I say exploring gaming cultures, what comes to mind, right? So is it about finding new games to play, or is it, like about what's the next trope? Sure, there's, that's part of it, but I feel like it goes so much deeper, right? It goes about the stories that we tell each other. It's the communities and the real human connections that we have. It's like the whole digital landscape that we can look at. And I always think of gaming culture, I think of different countries, like South Korea, like Japan, that have very distinct esports culture, for example, when I think of South Korea, with like packed stadiums, players who are like treated like rock stars, and kids growing up dreaming of going pro. Nowadays, you have that also in the US and so on, but it's anchored in the culture there. In some countries, I feel like gaming communities have formed around the whole free-to-play aspect of mobile games, because, like high-end consoles just aren't affordable for everyone. When we talk about gaming cultures, the human aspect, the stories behind the games, and what these digital worlds do to connect us all.
Whenever you play a game, there's always a main character. I think main characters are kind of ourselves. As developers and game creators build this world and build the storyline, there's always like a thing about NPCs. Non-player characters are part of like the story that builds up whatever story there is. And so if enough players play these stories, I think that this moment where the story in the game starts to color the culture that we see in gaming culture.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, I think. So much from within games has then found its way outside of the games into what we can now call just general gaming culture. I think Cyberpunk, for example, has made all that aesthetic more trendy over the past, I guess it's not that new a game anymore. But also Skyrim, for example, everybody was referencing these Fusro Dars and all these memes about Skyrim, and they're actually still in existence. There's probably people who know the memes that haven't even played the game, especially with Oblivion as well before Skyrim. That music, the is still on so many memes. It's all a part of gaming culture, so it doesn't have to be what I was talking about earlier of these chiptune things.
Taking an arrow to the knee kind of deal, right? So games have this incredible ability to bring people together, I feel, no matter who they are or where they're coming from. I feel like I know this firsthand, right? Because I know you two through our shared passion of gaming, and we're all coming from very different countries, right? So I'm coming from Germany, Edwin, you're from the UK, and Sam's from USA, I want to say, right? So we met like so many others through our shared passion for games. And honestly, if it weren't for games, I don't think we would have ever crossed paths, which I find very exciting. So I feel like everywhere you look, gaming culture is thriving. But here's the kicker. Most people still think of gamers as this one-size-fits-all stereotype, right? So where they're hiding in a basement, isolated, playing mindless, violent games. And I feel like this has so outdated at this point, where you have everyone is a gamer at this point. Your mom, or like your grandma, even playing a mobile game, or it's just very broad at this point. And let's not forget how the way we play has also changed, right? So you're not only playing nowadays on a Game Boy, you're not only playing on a console. There's so many ways of how you can play games nowadays.
I think the way that games portray cultures within them as well has gotten more sophisticated. It's probably unrelated, but still an interesting correlation that as games get more, I guess, sophisticated, or they have technological means to get a bit more in depth, the concept of gaming culture also is broadening a lot. It's becoming, the hardware is making it much more accessible, but also where we're still using high-end hardware, the games themselves are now able to define a much richer culture within the game. And I think that's now making gamers a more diversified culture as well.
I also feel like back in the day, multiplayer meant that you were sitting really close together, maybe in the same apartment, sitting shoulder to shoulder on a couch, passing a controller. And, like after every round, your brother would let you play maybe, or would unplug the controller. That was my first-hand experience with gaming with my brother, right? So now you're just as likely to be playing with people from 3 different continents, like in a virtual world. And it's not just about gaming anymore. It's about the shared experience, learning from other cultures. I don't think I've learned as much about other cultures other than through games in my entire life. Not to oversimplify this, of course, I took a lot with me from school, but you got to know actual people through these games from these cultures that you would otherwise not have gotten to know. I remember very fondly a time when I was sitting in a TeamSpeak, right, so I'm a bit older, with a few Chinese friends, and they had like this very unique English accent that was very hard for me to decipher at the time. And at one point you just started understanding it, and you all started to learn your own kind of in-game language of how you would communicate with one another.
Some of the first German words I learned were from playing Guild Wars. Ich suche whatever they were looking for, like you would form teams in the outposts.
Yeah, so you would pronounce that, ich suche. So I search for something.
Yeah.
We've all got these really fond memories about how gaming has impacted our lives, how it's brought people together. But can you think about a world in which games maybe don't exist, or maybe games weren't built the way that they were? And, not to be contrarian and not to, to introduce conflict here, but I'm very worried perhaps about the state of the business of building games. We're currently in an era right now when there's a lot of turmoil in our economy, and perhaps there's a lot of turmoil in the business world. And I personally think that games are just very complex content delivery systems. I mean, if anything, it's just displaying graphics, sound, a lot of logical triggers that make a player go through certain things. That's really kind of what a game is. It's just a closed loop piece of software. But also think about the way in which these businesses have to maximize their profits. They have to minimize their costs. They have to maximize their profits. We're gamers. We understand the concept of min-maxing. but just kind of like imagine like a world without games, or imagine a world in which games are being reduced to min-maxing some of these profits. It could be a really scary place. It could really threaten global gaming culture.
When I think of games, I think of animals playing, like it's not just something that we do as humans. It's a learning mechanism in a sense, right? So when you think of dogs playing with each other, or, like large tigers even, they all play. And I feel like there's so much beyond just the digital aspect, right? So of course, the moment we understand that we can make a lot of money from, like understanding these mechanisms on how our brains function, there's always this large door that opens to dark patterns and how like people can abuse these. And of course, I have to agree with you here. There is this really large part of the games industry that doesn't differentiate there between, should I do this? Is this ethical, or do I need to build my company so that my employees can have a job? That there is so much gray area here where I feel like it's not quite yet explored, and where as Edwin, as you said, like the gaming industry is still super young. And maybe we'll do this shift where it's more like becoming or evolving into this more Hollywood type of style of games industry. Who knows, right? So what does it all mean to us as as gamers? Why does it all matter? Is, like gaming continues to evolve? Is it shaping the way we think about identity, cooperation, and community? There are so many angles on how you can look at games. These aren't just digital spaces, right? They are real communities where people come together, break down borders, and build something new.
These games are wonderful tools for bringing people together, but also they're just reflecting society. So I feel like they can go either way or both ways. They could become far more inclusive, far less inclusive, far richer culturally, far less rich, far poorer culturally. And I think they will go both ways. That's my crystal ball prediction. And they can, because it's such an internet-based culture that it doesn't have to be consolidated. Whatever little pockets of culture form will be catered for and will kind of continue to be their own echo boxes or not. I also love how games within themselves can hold a mirror to the culture or the people they think will be playing the game. For example, there's a lot of games that make great satire, great parody, or just good cultural commentary. I think Dishonored was great fun as like quite an obvious critique of Victorian UK, Victorian England, that's sort of area. But then also it's about trends in modern society, problems in modern society. It's like never this isolated thing when you stop to actually think about what the game's trying to say. That's not unique to games, but what I love about games is that it forces you to engage with that dialogue, whereas with films, you can just look at it and experience it passively. But a game saying, here's a cool world where you're actually super powerful, but are you actually using your powers for good? And you have to engage with that question because you are that person using your powers either for good or not, or for the greater grey. On the other hand, sometimes games are absolutely insane. Super Mario. What is going on there? It's a Japanese game with an Italian plumber. The princess doesn't particularly look Italian to me. She's like sort of blonde hair, blue eyes. The castle is probably in a German style, and then the maps themselves are just anywhere and everywhere they could think of, like underground, some sort of Indian feel, whatever. It's just everywhere. And in this case, I think, in a way, that sheer cultural breadth and lack of cultural depth, perhaps, is its own culture. And people don't take offense to it because it's just ridiculous. And they don't really matter that much in the context of the game and its plot. In a way, those cultures are there just to make the game memorable, fun, and feel like an adventure. That's an important aspect of a culture in a game. It makes something more memorable inherently. Maybe there's some kind of human instinct that we just always want to know where something is from and attach some values to that.
I feel like every region almost has its own flavor when it comes to the games that resonate with its people. So here I have a question for you. What games would you say are heavily influenced by your own country or culture?
I think having a very multicultural background, I have always seen culture as this thing to be kind of like observed and also acted upon. And so definitely from like the standpoint of like the United States, you look at Grand Theft Auto and all the ridiculousness of Grand Theft Auto very much mimics the ridiculousness of the United States of America. Also, you look at like Western culture, you get Red Dead Redemption, right? Like that's just such a flavorful interpretation and narrative storytelling of like the Wild West. Recently, you have titles like Genshin Impact created by Chinese developers. Obviously, that kind of like very European trope kind of town, city, whatever kind of into it. But then they've also inserted a lot of Chinese cultural things. And I thought that was really interesting because up until this point, China had not been a major entertainment cultural exporter. And so seeing the success of Genshin Impact, I asked myself, one, they put such a hard, amount of dedicated work into it. But now we're looking at how are audiences now going to perceive those kind of stylistic things, right? We've always seen Western tropes in games. We've seen Japanese tropes in games. We've just kind of seen whatever sci-fi, whatever interpretations of it. Edwin, you were talking about Mario, this really cliche Italian-American trope of a pudgy guy with a mustache and a hat in overalls. And now we have this widely played game IP in Genshin Impact that is putting on a lot of Chinese influences into it. And then also recently, Black Myth Wukong, the mythical story of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, very Chinese. It's like Santa Claus for Chinese people. Like that's how popular the Monkey King is. And then taking that and kind of like putting it into a little bit of a style of an action button masher, kind of like God of War, putting that in there. Now our international audience is going to experience now in that aspect of culture. So I think that's really interesting when you ask me, how are these things heavily influenced? So again, I look at it both ways. I see culture influencing games, having it be reflective, and then also having the games be themselves commentary on the wider culture for audiences.
I wonder what that means for the German culture, because I've always felt like German influence in gaming, there are two things that often, one is that it often gets overshadowed by the country's history, especially around the wars, but there are also some other really famous games that are from Germany. For example, The Settlers and, farming simulators. In general, simulators are really popular in Germany, and I'm personally not a big simulator player, and I've never really understood why, but we have like a bus simulator, and I'm not entirely sure what that says about our culture, if we just like to do work in our free time as well. I'm not so sure about it, but maybe we just really love the detailed methodical processes, but I have to admit there's something strangely enjoyable around these games. I feel, in fact, some of these, I know game devs that I've worked on, and they are really excited about, okay, yeah, we added fog now to our game, and it's just the next awesome thing in their bus simulator farming game that it now has fog, and that's their unique sales proposition then for their game. So in fact, I feel developing games in Germany and in German history is something that is really interesting to do here, because there's actually an institute in Germany, or multiple institutions, that give grants specifically for, cultural games. So you get these really interesting titles that draw inspiration from things like German fairy tales or historical events. And it's pretty cool to see that side of gaming come to life. And I'm not sure, Sam, do you have something similar in the US where you would say oh, okay, this is something that can relate to this? Maybe not fairy tales, but you also mentioned Wukong. Is there something similar in the US?
Quite frankly, I don't actually think so. I think the United States exports so much of its culture throughout the 80s and 90s and the 2000s through just kind of whatever action-packed Hollywood that there is, that it actually influences so much of other development circles internationally when it comes to gaming culture. One of the first video games that I played on one of those old arcade consoles in the convenience store was Street Fighter. And what I thought was really interesting about that is obviously it was made by a Japanese company who makes Street Fighter, but then they had this interpretation of American characters in American settings, and in fact, actually international settings. And then so you would have, like, for example, Guile, the American Air Force Army guy. I don't really know exactly what his backstory was, but then he's got like the camo pants on, and like his stage is out like on the Air Force, and there's like jets and like airplanes, and they're all fighting in front of like supply boxes or whatever. And I think it's always really interesting to see that the cultural institution of the United States as a whole is just like, I don't know, whatever action movie tropes that there are, right? And so you have like all these other gaming cultures that kind of like piggyback on top of that. Red Dead Redemption, I was talking about, Grand Theft Auto, obviously, and like different Japanese games that also take these kind of like caricatures of American culture and put them into games like Street Fighter or whatever. What I think is also interesting about culture in gaming, and specifically gaming culture, and how audiences and players connect with that culture, is really maybe also the complexity of how certain games are made, because based on the complexity of a particular game and based on the popularity of that game, I almost feel like there's a correlation that gaming culture becomes more intense and more complexified if the game is also more complex. So, we've talked about MMORPGs also having, MMOs are really complex games, and those complex games create complex cultures and complex player interactions between them.
Exactly. I think a culture can't just be described as some dry set of values and behaviors. I think that actually misses the point that, like within a complex MMORPG that develops its own culture around it, that culture becomes more than the sum of its parts, because that shared identity contextualizes everybody who is playing it, what they value both within the game and outside the game, and what they're doing within the game, and their life choice to play that game. It's actually an immensely rich and layered thing to just talk about a culture within even just one game. Far more so if you want to talk about gaming culture as a whole.
I believe we're only scratching the surface of what gaming cultures have to offer. And as we dive deeper into this digital age, understanding them might just help us understand ourselves a little better too. So whether you're someone who's already found lifelong friends, so gaming just like we have, or you're just getting started, know that this journey into gaming culture is just beginning.
Gaming culture is a massive topic, and today we've only scratched the surface. Hopefully, we'll be able to come back to this topic in the future. For now, you can join the conversation by tagging us at The Gentleland on X, TikTok, and Instagram. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn at Gentleland. If you have questions or comments about the show, then send us an email to podcast@gentleland.net.
Be sure to let us know what you think about today's episode on social media. And if you're loving the show, please share it with your friends and family in the games industry. Thanks for being here with us. We hope you learned something new, and we really appreciate you joining us for the Gentleland Show.